Hi, my name is Madden. I coach collegiate League of Legends for Arizona State University. It's not a paid gig, not a paid gig, but I digress. I'm very passionate about competitive sports. Always have been competing in varsity in high school for various sports. Not seriously, but um, growing up in male spaces um, and as someone who has benefited from playing sports at a non-competitive level, it's very hurtful to see bans across the country relying on purely bigotry to just ban kids kind of unilaterally from sports when it seems as though the only time you see problems that these uh, that conservatives are concerned about is at the upper echelons of sports. Uh, the best way to kind of context or contextualize these efforts is through Utah Governor Spencer Cox's statement on why he vetoed one of these bills. He stated that he has 75K high school kids, four of which are trans, playing in high school sports. Sorry, it was 75K uh, athletes, four of which are trans, one of which is playing girls sports. Now that is entirely different set of these reported suicidality that he kind of stipulates. Like obviously these are not numbers from Utah exclusively, but it seems as though he's trying to put the weight of these very disproportionate numbers together and saying that hey, like maybe this isn't the right way to go. And while this is a very welcome and fresh take from a Republican of such a conservative state as Utah, even though as I say conservative, but they are also leaning more and more progressive because as they welcome more Silicon Valley initiatives. Ever since like 2016, even they've been growing in their in that kind of quality. But that being said, uh, Lauren Boebert championed the legislator overriding this veto, which ended up confirming his build anyways. Um, so, but I think concern about trans kids playing with other trans kids, which shouldn't be a concern, and concerns for athletic competition in the upper levels and like D1 and Olympic sports. I feel as though people kind of conflate these issues when I feel as though it's kind of a non-issue. I think you still have to pay attention to like women's and the men's spaces in this discussion. However, uh, the concern over the benefits that HRT would give trans women over cis women is just not a thing to worry about. If that means banning them from socializing in sports and being a fucking human, being a fucking kid, uh, you know, I digress. But conversations on Twitter, Twitch, social media, the like, have been very concerning because I see a lot of people with like anime profile pictures and pronouns in their bios, suggesting that there's no advantage, and this is a case closed fact that trans women will pose no advantage on HRT. Even some suggesting that you don't even need to undergo this like 1 year period that the International Olympic Committee suggests that you undergo HRT before you. Well, it's much more than a suggestion, but before you compete with cis women. Um, yeah, some people even suggest that you don't even need to go undergo HRT to compete with women, which me being 6'2", I'd fucking love that shit. Like, let's go. I've met maybe two women ever that are taller than me, like growing up. So, uh, and I don't even know if that remains. Um, it seems very illogical. Dr. Veronica Ivy, I'm not going to go into her studies now, but she has a lot of good details detailing why this largely is not a problem, especially if you do undergo puberty blockers and you don't undergo a male puberty. But the male puberty complicates things a lot, especially when you get into higher divisions of athletics, especially with respiratory function between AMAB lungs and AFAB lungs. Um, AFAB lungs tend to kind of last longer, but under duress perform worse, whereas like men's lung are greater under duress, but seem to last long, or the health is less sustained as you continue to age. Um, you know, uh, those differences being the case, it would seem as though here. Sorry, I have like one clip. Yeah, we can move this up a little bit. So, according to the International Olympic Committee, transgender women may be eligible to compete after 12 months prior to competition, depleting their testosterone through HRT. Um, However, only hemoglobin decreases to similar levels as cisgender women, where muscle cross sectional area, lean body mass, strength remains to be larger. You okay? Sorry, excuse me. It seems as though even though there's this 12 month waiting period, from 12 to 36 months, I can even scroll in here a little bit. 12 to 36 months of hormone therapy, you still see advantages in all of these areas. And while we want to be inclusive, we have to recognize that inclusivity and competitive integrity are two vastly different things and oftentimes conflict, especially as you get into the upper echelons of athletic competition. Um, Here. Um, Now, this study that I'm going to link to in the description uses a lot of verbiage about transsexuals, stats from the UK. Mind you, all stats about HRT are almost always going to be white trans women, almost always. Now more so, there's trans men who are entering discussion, but almost all of them are white, who have the actual like privilege of undergoing this like pretty unilaterally. Um, so that being said, it's always kind of a vibe check when it says transsexuals who or it donate or distinguishes between transgender people and transsexual because that's like a nightmare of like medicalism, which is something I understand very very deeply. But um, if you go to the prescription of this, is this okay? Here I have it like brought up here, but this is what it links to as like at the very end of the article. This is what it links to, and it acknowledges that accepted science regarding male and female physiology suggests that trans women have an advantage over cisgendered counterparts. This advantage stems relatively from the high testosterone levels in prior male physiology of trans women. Excuse me. Conversely, trans men who wish to compete in men's division may be disadvantaged in comparison with cis men. Hence, while inclusion supports trans women and trans men competing in division that matches their gender identity, this may not satisfy the principle of fairness. They then go on to say that we should um, abolish the gender binary in elite the gender bi the okay whatever we should replace the gender binary in elite sports with a nuanced algorithm that accounts for both physiological and social parameters. I don't know how the fuck that happens, but if they can make it happen, obviously I would agree. But this is obviously something vastly different from something that the likes of like Jk Rowling or other transphobic um, advocates for like women's human rights in shielding their bigotry in feminism. This is like obviously abolishing of women's spaces. This is not something they would prescribe. So this journal using the term transsexual a million times doesn't fail the vibe check for me, even though on the eyes it kind of does. My next point is that this entire argument and obsession with whether or not you get advantages um, from male puberty or not is pretty. In, the conversation completely ignores the whole environment of which trans athletes could train in before transitioning and what advantages those could gain. It seems very clear that women's spaces for competitive sports and competition in general are not as funded or lacking in some way to men's. A good example is this is the U.S. national team who only just recently sued for like equal funding, despite like absolute like massively outperforming the men's national team. And also we can see this in chess elo, is that even accounting for elo, uh, yeah, female players tend to perform worse against male counterposts. Counter Female players tend to perform worse against male opponents than against female opponents, even accounting for chess strength, which the study that they cite goes like dictates elo specifically, and also even begins to factor for age differences. But given that fact, knowing that they're playing against a man makes them play worse. The performance drop is roughly equivalent to a woman giving her male opponent the advantage of the first move in every single game. I don't play a lot of chess, but I would imagine that it depends on what color pieces you are. Is that difference? But um, I working in esports, it's very clear that women need specific spaces, and it's not uncommon to see um, trans folks celebrated in these spaces, or even like non-trans folks that like scratch that itch, sneaky cough cough, that seem to be held to these competitive highlights, but then cis women themselves do not see those benefits. Um, and I think you can continue to say that like male spaces specifically are have got to give you some sort of advantage if you get to train in male spaces before transitioning. Um, I watch a lot of MMA, and fucking Daniel Cormier soying out, but uh, like I've seen footage and footage after gyms and gyms like this, and I've never ever seen women. And I've looked at so much women's MMA, and I've never seen any training like this, where they're just constantly sparring everywhere around everyone, like grappling like this. Ooh, okay. Uh, so watch the left leg here. Left leg is back. Chance change. Left leg's back. Left leg's back. Left leg is back. So with the right leg staying so rigid like this, he literally trips him with his own left leg. This is savage shit.
Hey, send me that one.
Oh fuck. Um, I don't know. I think it's very important to talk about women's spaces. Maybe if I would be interested, and obviously I would change my opinion if women's spaces were created and they start to prevail, right? Obviously, I would have to change my opinion, but to completely ignore that and say that it's a case closed uh, fact that trans women don't have any advantage, and that people who do say that are like transphobic or they're demonizing trans women. Um, and, and if you make those claims without talking about the environmental factors, I think you're doing the entire conversation a disservice. It reminds me of kind of bad science in the bell curve. Like the science always never lines up. Like all the science in the bell curve is mostly done by like eugenicists who like went to apartheid Africa to like get a mean of like black IQ, and then they didn't control, and then they went to like Oxford for like a white DNA, right? So they're cherry picking the data, but you don't even need to get into like the data semantics to see that they completely ignore the environmental effects that um, and socioeconomic effects that would tailor to IQ. It's like, don't worry about it. It's all right. It's all about the IQ, baby. We have these very unique bell curves to plot it out for us. That we're fine. Um, so overall, I think like the conversation just has to be better. If you're I don't know, if you ever find yourself trying to be a trans ally and you're ignoring these facts, I think you could be a better trans ally. Um, Getting into how people understand trans issue, it's I want to be clear that I don't want to be championing women's spaces while like shitting on trans people, trans athletes specifically, because obviously that is a very like red flag. A lot of anti-trans advocacy. Um, One point that stands out is this.
We see approximately
Uh, yeah, here.
demand by the jail. But this is not an isolated
Yeah.
criminal, would have been housed
So,
in a women's jail.
uh, when this happened, um, Tucker Carlson
Prisons
brought
that they
on
last year. It went into
uh, a spokesperson from the Women's Human Rights Campaign. Even the name is very, very telling of what the organization is all about. It's about human rights for women, just not those women. You got to be clear. This is very similarly kind of parodied in the
Talk about a truly
Shaun's video about the BBC, talking about gold star lesbians and different ways in which the queer community, or most notably the gay community and lesbians specifically, will demonize trans women as not being real women, and them claiming that them having a preference is bigotry, which is a much larger conversation. But it, all of these kind of, it's like maybe there's a conversation there, but it's never about that conversation. It's always about the bigotry. And obviously, I want to be clear, that's not where I'm coming from. Um, yeah, fucking Cat Black commenting. I don't even care. I don't care. But this is something that Jk Rowling is like very, very, very famous for. Most notably, Jk Rowling recently had to disavow Putin, saying that talking about cancel culture in the West, they want to cancel a whole country, and then quoting J.K. Rowling to support it, in which J.K. Rowling needed to take a step out and say, hey, uh, Russia just named me as a big anti-trans advocate, but hey, Putin bad, uh, which I think is just very, very telling of the fact. And I would not suggest Shaun's video going into J.K. Rowling. I would suggest Contrapoints because she does a much better job. Yeah, I saw the video that Shaun posted for for Harry Potter, and I don't know, delving through every single written work of J.K. Rowling's to with a disingenuous lens is not something I'm interested in. Certainly not for an hour and a half. Um, and it's also kind of parrots like DeSantis's kind of saying that uh, DeSantis refuses to recognize transgender swimmers win, saying that the fastest woman time of any woman in college athletics is the deserved winner. Um, it's like very clearly saying, she's the best woman, just not those women, and it's very, very like once you see the pattern, it's really hard to ignore. But also, once you see the pattern, it's really easy to get trans advocates that are just trying to have a simple conversation about like stats of like the upper echelons of trans athleticism and why those prescriptions shouldn't actually adhere to on a local level, as Spencer Cox kind of says. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm transphobic, but I just want a fucking rational conversation, please.